The BBC could have made a powerful statement for free speech and common sense by backing Lineker from the beginning. Instead, it's become, well, a spectacular own goal. Gary Lineker stood his ground against a howling mob demanding his head over an honestly held opinion. He also stood his ground against his employers at the BBC as it tied itself in knots of chaos and hypocrisy. It took them a staggering 6 days to resolve Jugsgate, 6 days of turmoil, risking the entirety of the BBC's sports coverage and the future of its management over a single tweet expressing an opinion. And the net result of the whole farrago is a lot of very angry people and a battered BBC reputation that will pay the price for a lot longer than 6 days. Match of the Day bizarrely aired with no pundits or commentary at the weekend after a host of stars pulled out in support of Lineker. Sports coverage across the BBC descended into a complete farce as pre-recorded podcasts and filler took the place of some of its most popular shows, and that's why the BBC's really backed down. It was about to lose one of its biggest stars, obliterating its reputation in the process, and it couldn't even put together a convincing argument for why any of this was happening. None of the people baying for Lineker's blood have been able to explain why he's any different to the many other contractors who frequently express opinions, like Apprentice host Alan Sugar, who blasted Jeremy Corbyn on the front page of The Sun and made other rather unfortunate, inappropriate jokes. Or Jeremy Clarkson, who, when he was host of Top Gear, said striking public sector workers should be shot. Or Andrew Neil, who was a BBC star interviewer and politics host for decades, same time as running The Spectator. All of these people continued their work for the BBC, along with Sir David Attenborough, who talks very stridently about things like climate change, because audiences like them. And they were able to see the blindingly obvious difference between the BBC's editorial stance and the personal views of some of the people who work for them. The entire saga has shone an unflattering light on the BBC. Tim Davie looks hapless. Perfectly straightforward rules about impartiality have become an unsolvable riddle. And questions are now intensifying over the future of Chairman Richard Sharp, a Conservative donor who organised a massive loan for Boris Johnson, just before the same Boris Johnson gave him a job. But more than anything, it's shone a light, unflatteringly, on some weapons-grade hypocrites. Many of the people crusading for Lineker's sacking have found themselves caught up in the toxic swirl of cancel culture they normally profess to hate. The BBC could have made a powerful statement for free speech and common sense by backing Lineker from the beginning. Instead, it's become, well, a spectacular own goal. Well, you've lost. It's Lineker.
Not at all. I've been proven absolutely right.
Lineker won, BBC Thursday, and its supporters nonsense. Like you.
I was here last Thursday and I said he's brought the BBC into disrepute, and he did, because they had zero sports coverage on Saturday. All the others sided with him. I was proven exactly right. Even Henry's just admitted he breached the editorial guidelines.
Why is he back on air then?
Well, hang on. He breached the guidelines. He breached the code of conduct for social media.
No one said that.
Which is why he's...
Nobody has said that.
They absolutely have said that.
No, they haven't.
Which is why he's agreed...
The BBC... Sorry. Sorry, Richard. You can't just say things without me countering. That's how we got into this trouble in the first place. The point is, they haven't found him in breach, actually. They've actually allowed him back on air on Saturday because they recognised that they were up against it with all the other staff going out.
Because he's agreed with them that all these guidelines need a review.
Yes, but they haven't found him in breach.
They know he breached the guidelines, which was set in 2020.
You can't keep telling me that the sky is red when it's blue.
Do you want me to reread them again? The social media guideline says you cannot tweet...
You might say he's in breach. The BBC, in its conclusion today, has not said he was in breach of the guidelines.
Because they're desperately trying to settle. The guidelines...
So you admit they haven't said that?
The fact is...
Was he in breach or not?
They've agreed to review the social media guidelines because it's unclear.
That doesn't mean he was in breach.
Well, I showed you last week.
You've just stated for a fact he was in breach.
Because he used his personal Twitter account to give a partial opinion.
So why hasn't the BBC said he was in breach of his contract?
Well, essentially, that was why they suspended him last
But they haven't
Thursday.
now said he was in breach. Away from the argument of whether Gary Lineker should be sacked from the BBC, and by the way, I don't think he's going to be at all, there's been a huge backlash over how he compared the government's rhetoric on migrants to the rhetoric in the 30s in Germany from Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. In his tweet, he suggested the Home Secretary's response to the small boats crisis used, quotes, language that is not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 30s. My issue with this is, you talk about slippery slope. The moment you get into 1930s Germany, you evoke memory of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis and the Holocaust and 12 million people being, murdered, exterminated in concentration camps, 6 million Jews in concentration camps and so on. I just think that is a slippery slope. And the moment, to me, anyone invokes that in relation to a current government like this Conservative government, to me, you're losing the argument, because you're using an extremity of a debate which just bears no relation to reality.
Well, right, and I'm not particularly easily offended, so I'm not offended by his comments. But the problem we've got here is not so much that he said something silly or insensitive. For me, the problem is it's completely inaccurate. Tens of thousands of people were not trying to get into Germany on small boats. And that is, I'm afraid, the real problem with this whole argument is the people who want to demonize Britain as this racist hellhole can never seem to explain why tens of thousands of people like me want to come to this country and settle here. And some of them do so illegally, even by breaking the law and putting themselves in danger, which is something actually I think we should all be concerned about and should be seeking to end. My biggest concern as someone who, like you, is proud of Britain for helping people who are coming from genuine need, is that if we continue to make the British public feel like they're being taken for a ride, and of course they're right to feel that way when we spend £7 million a day accommodating these people, if we continue down that path, then eventually people are going to get fed up and say, we don't want anyone coming in, we don't care about the circumstances. And then the very people that these woke lovies like Gary Lineker pretend to care about are going to be the ones that suffer in the end.
It's been a torrid week for those who insist that cancel culture either doesn't matter or doesn't exist. First, Gary Lineker was mobbed and then suspended for his opinions about the government's migrant policy. Next, Fiona Bruce was denounced as an apologist for domestic violence over this.
For a change, I'm not blaming Boris Johnson or Stanley Johnson. Actually, Ken, he was a wife-beater, Stanley Johnson, on record.
OK, let me just intervene. I'm not disputing what you're saying, but just so everyone knows what this is referring to. So Stanley Johnson's wife spoke to a journalist, Tom Bauer, and she said that Stanley Johnson had broken her nose and she had ended up in hospital as a result. Stanley Johnson has not commented publicly on that. Friends of his have said it did happen, it was a one-off.
Yes, but it did happen.
Well, that was it. Fiona Bruce was directed to read a prepared statement for legal reasons. This kind of thing happens all the time, by the way, in live television. I'll occasionally have something I have to read, which is just part of what you do as a live news presenter. If you think someone's going to make an inflammatory statement, you have something which can counter it. It's called, being fair, being reasonable about these things. Fiona Bruce didn't pass judgment. She didn't give a personal opinion. She read a BBC statement of context on legal advice that she was directed to do. But the righteous mob don't care about the nuances of these things. Members of Parliament said that she was disgraceful. Petitions circulated demanding she be fired. Outraged keyboard warriors described her as sickening. This is Fiona Bruce we're talking about. And Refuge, the domestic violence charity that Fiona Bruce had represented with distinction for 25 years, dropped her like a rock. What did she do wrong?
What did she do wrong? OK, let's unpack it. Even if you believe that everything that she said was absolutely correct in the fact that she had to allow a right of reply, I think no one would have had an issue up until the point in the sentence at which she said it was a one-off. Because the framing itself implies some sort of diminishing of the form of account.
She didn't. Hang on, Larissa. Hang on. On that point, Larissa, hang on. Look, Fiona Bruce didn't say it was a one-off. She said that is what friends of Stanley Johnson have said by way of response, which, by the way, is entirely true. Well, hang on. You may not want to hear this. Let me finish. That's what friends of Stanley Johnson have told people, and that's been the only response he's given. She was accurately giving the other side of this. She wasn't saying that is true or that is my opinion. She was simply giving a legal right to reply because that's what we do in this business.
Which I was about to acknowledge and say that actually I think the fault lies with the person who wrote that and who gave it to her to say, because in fact not acknowledging that there would be backlash from stating it in that way is ridiculous. I don't know how anyone can work in this business and not understand that for someone to say one-off sounds as though you're calling any one-off form of violence when it comes to gendered violence and domestic abuse null and void.
Again, Larissa.
If I hit you in my car, are you going to say, oh, but it was one-off? I broke my arm, but it was one-off.
Hang on. Let me unpack what you've just said. Here's the point. I don't know the answer, nor does Fiona Bruce. We don't know how many times Stanley Johnson may or may not have hit his wife, right? All we know is what she has said, and he's not responded publicly other than to tell people off the record through friends it was a one-off. That might be true. We don't know. It's a journalist's job to try and find out. But short of actually having hard evidence to corroborate that, she did what I think any news journalist would do in that situation and simply gave the other side from his point of view and said that he's told people it was a one-off. Well, as award shows go, this year's Oscars was about as beige as you can get. Even the traditional red carpet took a hit, replaced by a beige one. But what's got us all talking, for the wrong reasons, is the ever-obnoxious Hugh Grant. He's seemingly delighted in humiliating interviewer, the supermodel Ashley Graham, on the non-red carpet. I mean, it went on a bit, the Hugh Grant exchange there with poor old Ashley Graham. He was just doing a job, right? If you go on the red carpet at the Oscars, or the beige carpet as it was last night, it's the biggest carpet in show business history. It is crawling in journalists. The only purpose of walking down it is to talk to the media. But old Hugh Grant, who hates the media, decided he wanted to present an award at the Oscars and march down the carpet and then be a complete douchebag to any journalists who had the temerity or supermodels to ask him questions. Like, what are you wearing? Which is probably the most famous question in Hollywood history, to which the answer is, I'm wearing Dolce & Gabbana, or whatever it is you're wearing. What you don't do is humiliate and pick on a young interviewer just trying to do her job. You don't roll your eyes and walk away like, God, have I got to deal with these idiots? To me, he just behaved like a dick. I mean, he just treated Ashley Graham, I felt, with total disrespect. And he pretended like the job of somebody on a red carpet, if you're an actor at the Oscars, is not to talk to the media, or if you have to, look like you're sucking lemons.
Yeah, I have to say, listen, I love Hugh Grant, but
Really?
he was out of order. Ashley, yeah, I do. I think he's a great actor. But
A great actor?
He is a great actor.
He plays the same role every time he does a movie.
And he did one the other day on the red
doesn't.
carpet.
He plays a slightly dimwit, foppish British
And that's what he did on the red carpet.
Go on,
The
sorry.
thing is, if you don't want to talk to press, if you are bored by it all, don't do the carpet. That's the way it is. If you know you're not in the mood to talk to press, don't do it.
At first sight, the British monarchy should already be finished. Let's face it, many people see privilege as a crime against equal opportunity. The monarchy, meanwhile, is undeniably built on illogical birthrights. Populism rages against elites. But the royal family are the most obvious elites of them all. Tribalism and brash opinions dominate public debate in an age of identity politics, but we're quietly ruled by an unspeaking authority that takes absolutely no position. And that's really the whole point. Fickle politicians tear strips of each other and survive by dividing us, but the monarchy is a constant, reassuring, above the fray. That's why it's not only survived, but thrives against all odds. But there is growing evidence of cracks in Britain's gilded edge. Humza Yousaf, who's the frontrunner to be Scotland's next leader, has put the future of the monarchy firmly on the table, promising to give the Scottish people a vote on whether to have a monarch or an elected head of state within 5 years. When I look at the way that the American system has worked, with this two-party system fraught with corruption, fraught with people who just have to have a big enough bank balance to run for president, the division they have in that country. I look at the division in this country. Right. I look at the procession of useless leaders we've had. The one constant we've had, and I genuinely believe this, has been the Queen and now Charles. We've had two monarchs in my lifetime, and I do think they provide the country with just a comfort blanket, which should not be underestimated. Why are you laughing?
Because it's a comfort blanket. We don't need a comfort blanket. I mean,
I think we do, actually.
Why? I mean, it's so patronising and it's so unpatriotic to suggest that we need a comfort blanket. I have never heard a good argument for the monarchy, and it certainly isn't a net positive.
So you didn't see any positives about the Queen?
There's no... Well, I mean, it's not about the Queen, it's about the monarchy.
Well, she was the head of the monarchy for 70 years.
Right, but now we have...
But you saw, just to be clear, you saw no positives in the Queen.
It's not about the Queen, it's about the monarchy.
Well, I'm asking you about the Queen.
Well, I don't really know her, and that's the problem. We don't know...
Well, how old are you?
None of us really...
How old are you?
48. But
48. So for 48 years of your life, she was your monarch.
Really knew her.
Don't squirm off the old net here.
No, because the issue is the monarchy.
Did you not understand that she was one of the, if the most respected people in the world?
Well, I think that's disputable, but I mean the point is...
Who was more respected than her?
That's a silly argument.
Well, give me a name.
This is a deadline...
Give me a name.
This is a dead-end
Sorry,
argument.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with the interview, but I ask questions, and your job is to answer them.
The argument is...
So if I ask you, do you not see any positives in the Queen, you'd say no.
The argument is about... The discussion is not about which monarch is there, because the Queen's no longer there. So
with respect to you, the argument... The discussion is whatever I decide it's going to be.
That's our history.
I'm asking you...
We now have...
You made a statement about the monarchy, and I said to you, did you see no positives from the Queen?
I saw no positives from the Queen as a head of state.